Well, chapter 51 of the book of Jeremiah is a continuation of chapter 50. This is the prophecy about the destruction of Babylon. So, this is probably another one of those chapters or prophecies that the Israelites liked, because this is the impending doom of Babylon since they were just recently destroyed by Babylon. So, let's jump into this one. It's kind of a long one, so I'm going to try to go through this one as quick as we can. Verse 1, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up against Babylon and against them that dwell in the midst of them, that rise up against me a destroying wind. This is probably a bit of a metaphor, this idea of destroying wind, uh, basically for like a change in things, kind of like a spirit of a destroyer. Wind is a good connection to this next verse, in fact, about separating wheat from chaff, because when you're harvesting your wheat, you'd beat it, get the wheat and chaff kind of separate out, and then to get them fully separated out, you throw the wheat in the air, and then the chaff gets blown with the wind away, and then the wheat, because it's heavier, just drops straight down, basically. So in verse 2 it says, And will send unto Babylon fanners, that shall fan her, and shall empty her lands, for in the day of trouble they shall be against her round about. So fanners, separating wheat from chaff, judgment on Babylon, basically. So that's kind of ties with that idea of the destroying wind concept from verse 1. In fact, Clark in his Bible commentary said, When the corn is trodden out with the feet of cattle, or crushed out with a heavy wheel armed with iron, and with the shovel they throw it up against the wind, that the chaff and broken straw may be separated from it. This is the image used by the prophet. These people shall be trodden, crushed, and fanned by their enemies. So it's not a good future for Babylon. Verse 3, Against him that bendeth, let the archer bend his bow. Against him that lifteth himself up in his brigadine, and spare ye not her young men, destroy ye utterly all her host. So, pretty complete destruction of Babylon that's coming in their future. Verse 4, Thus the slain shall fall in the land of the Chaldeans, and they that are thrust through in her streets. So again, if they're fighting, if people are being thrust through and killed in the streets, the fighting is inside the city. Babylon's a formidable, the city is very formidable, and the wall around it we talked about last chapter. But if there's fighting in the streets, the enemy is inside the city. So verse 5, For Israel hath not been forsaken, nor Judah of his God, of the Lord of hosts, though their land was filled with sin against the Holy One of Israel. So God is now still remembering his people, basically. He wants to help them. Even though they've been bad, they've sinned, and they are suffering the consequences of their choices, eventually they will come around and be in a better position, basically. So he's hoping to use this destruction of when Babylon came through and destroyed Jerusalem to help them and encourage them to be better through the challenges, basically. So this is as Babylon's collapsing and falling apart. This is the Lord's admonition to the Israelites, basically. It says, verse 6, Flee out of the midst of Babylon and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. So this is a reminder, basically, to Israel that when Babylon falls, it's time to get out. It's time to leave. Don't stay and wait around and want to be a part of that. Leave. It's time to go back, basically, to Jerusalem. Don't get caught in the destruction and the problems. Verse 7, Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand. So now a cup, I'm going to pause right here for a second. Actually, let me finish reading this one. This will make more sense if we read the whole thing. Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. So the cup has been a symbol of the wrath of God in a lot of the Old Testament. We've seen this metaphor a lot, to drink the dregs of the cup, to drink of the cup of the wrath of God. So Babylon has been the cup of the wrath of God for a long time and has really disrupted the other nations and caused lots of problems. So what's interesting about this is Babylon once was the cup, delivering the wrath of God to other nations. At this point, when this prophecy is fulfilled, Babylon will be drinking of that cup. They won't be the cup anymore. It'll turn, this metaphor is being turned on them. Verse 8, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her. Take balm for her pain, if so be she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go everyone into his own country. For her judgment reacheth unto heaven, and is lifted up even to the skies. So this means that this phrase of her judgment that reacheth up into heaven means judgment was huge proportions. It's like massive destruction, massive problems that are going to be happening for them. So they say, while it's sad to see the destruction happen, because of what Babylon has done to everybody else, there's not a lot of love loss with these other nations, basically, as they see this, when it'll happen. It's not going to happen for a while. We're still in the exile period where the Jews are exiled into Babylon and Jerusalem is destroyed. There's some Jews living in Egypt. There's still more fighting and contention that's happening. So we're in that interim exile period, and then this is going to happen later, basically the destruction of Babylon. We're going to see that in other prophets' writings after the book of Jeremiah. So let's see, verse 10. The Lord hath brought forth our righteousness. Come, let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord our God. Now, this is referencing what the Israelites will say. So kind of thinking ahead of, when the Israelites see Babylon destroyed, they're going to go, yay, God is getting rid of our captors. We can now go free. So it's interesting that they say, let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord our God. That would be going back to Jerusalem to declare that. Now, maybe the people will remember the things Jeremiah prophesied about this when they go to return. They'll probably think of this. Jeremiah prophesied this. Yes, it's time to go back. This will be definitely a vindication of Jeremiah and Israel to have this happen. Now, God will prove his prophet right and show forgiveness to his people now that they have had time to come to their senses and change. So this is them. They're finally at a point where they're going, okay, we need to go follow our God. We're kind of sick of doing this other thing. It's not working out. Let's go follow our God and get those blessings from him again. Which is the whole point of the exile, is to help them to find God. So they're given challenges so that they can find God. I think that's a great metaphor for sometimes challenges in our life when we think about challenges we have. And sometimes we're given challenges possibly to help us find God. Maybe that's challenges to some beliefs and ideas we have already. Maybe that's health, financial, career challenges, other things like that are designed for us to meet God. That is that we're not actively going to God, and so he's going to help us come to him or give us that opportunity to come to him. We can choose to be bitter about it and not go towards God, or we can see this as an opportunity to find God and come to him. And if we do find God through the challenge, then it was a good challenge for us. Good thing for us to not so much, I wouldn't say experience, because nobody wants to experience hard times. But if it helps you to come closer to God through the hard times, then there's value that you've gained out of that bad experience, basically. So that's what Israel's going through right now. Good metaphor for us. Verse 11, make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes. For his device is against Babylon, to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. Now let's look at this. This is a reference to the Medes. Okay, this is the people that later become Persia. They become part of Persia. So in Thompson's book, the book of Jeremiah, he talks about this for a little bit. And I thought he had a great quote. He says, the reference to the king of the Medes being roused up calls for some explanation. The Medes lived in northwest Iran in the general region of the modern Iranian Kurdistan. Their capital was Ecbatana, and one of their greatest kings was Astyages. I think that's how you say it. He lived 585 to 550 BC, was his reign. Their history before Cyrus is somewhat obscure, but something is known. Shalmaneser III of Assyria in the 9th century BC encountered their chiefs and destroyed many towns in the region of Lake Urmia. Tiglath-Pileser had campaigns against Urartu and pillaged the lands of the Medes. One of their leaders, Rusas, stirred up intrigue among the tribes against Assyria. Sargon II encountered the Mannai southeast of Lake Urmia, and the Medes in the same general area during the late 8th century BC. So that would be the time of Assyrian conquest when they went into Israel as well. Isaiah would be the prophet around then. The main one. There's several prophets back then. So it is people of this type who appear in verse 27, Ararat, Urartu, Mini or Mannai, and Ashkenaz, Ashguzai, along with the Medes. In 550 BC, Cyrus, the Persian ruler, invaded the region and subjugated it. The Masoretic text refers to the kings of the Medes in the plural, which may mean only that the leader of the Medes is seen as being associated with a number of vassal rulers. If the term Medes is to be taken at face value, these lines must have been written at a time when the Medes were powerful enough to be considered a potential destroyer of Babylon. Now, pause for a second here. That would be true coming from the perspective, there's a scholarly perspective, we've talked about this in Isaiah and Jeremiah, that scholars sometimes discredit the idea of prophecy. So scholars want to look at this chapter in Jeremiah and say, well, this was written long into the exile when the Medes were actually rebuilding and doing things and had some power, or maybe even after the exile this was written. If it's prophecy, it can be written at any time because God is the one that knows what the Medes are doing and what they will do in the future. So this could be written at the early part of the exile if we believe in prophecy, that Jeremiah could have written it long before the conditions were right for it to happen, because this is coming from God's perspective of knowing what the future is going to hold. So continuing on with Thompson's article here, he says, there is some evidence that about 561, 560 BC, an invasion of Babylon by the Medes was expected. We have no historical evidence of any outcome. On the other hand, the term Medes may be a general one. It is known that the mother of Cyrus, the Persian, was a Mede, and the Medes and Persians are linked together several times in the book of Daniel. In that case, the reference here may be to Cyrus, but the matter is still open to debate. So just talking about this verse 11, we don't fully understand when they talk about the spirit of the kings of the Medes. Could this be talking about the Medes, the different kings and groups, tribal groups, that they eventually come together, work with the Persians to conquest Babylon? Yeah, that'll happen. That's basically telling what's going to happen to the destruction of Babylon, which would also in a way reference possibly even Cyrus as a king of Persia, but his mother was a Mede as well. So this area of the nation, in what we would call present-day Kurdistan, that area is where these people are coming from, and they're going to be the group that takes out Babylon basically in the future. Their future, not our future, sorry. Okay, verse 12, set up the standard upon the walls of Babylon, make the watch strong, set up the watchmen, prepare the ambushes, for the Lord hath devised and done that which he spake against the inhabitants of Babylon. So getting ready, put the standard on the walls, that's the flags up on the walls, make the watch strong, that's put a lot of guards up there to watch for the enemy coming, set up the watchmen, those kinds of things. So preparing for battle, preparing for a battle to come. Now, it is possible that there was an attack on the city itself, but we know the walls around the city were really tall and thick, so a direct assault would be a hard fight. This is a big challenge when you really look at Babylon, because as we've talked about, if I remember right, the walls around Babylon were about 100 feet thick and 300 feet tall. They were big walls, almost like being in a canyon with mountains around you. There was a big wall. It probably took a while before the sun would come into the city because of the size of these walls, basically. Now there is disagreement about how the how Babylon fell. So this is like telling Babylon, be ready, get ready, fight is coming to you, basically. Um, so let's kind of talk about this a little bit. What are some of the challenges that happened with the fall of Babylon? Uh, there's a story from the Greek historian Herodotus that talks about at some point there's so cities. Let me give you a little background here. Okay, so cities, one of the big challenges that a major metropolitan city in the ancient world had is utilities, basically, which is like water. So the cities would need a supply of water. So oftentimes cities would be built on a river so that they had access to the water. You'd get your drinking water from upstream, and downstream would be the waste, so it would leave the city. But sometimes they would also build aqueducts, like the Romans built a lot of aqueducts to bring water into their city. Rather than go to the water, they brought the water to them. It is possible with Babylon that they built a river, basically, because they weren't very far. I'm trying to remember the name of the river. I don't think I had it written down here, unfortunately. They're not far from, I believe it's Tigris River. Could be Euphrates River. I'm trying to think off the top of my head where it is. But anyways, here's the thing: is they probably diverted a river. Okay, they built their own river that goes underneath the walls into the city, and then they would dam up that river and force the river to go through their city, and then it would come out the city and then eventually go back into the normal river stream. So you just have this dry riverbed where they've blocked it off. According to this story from Herodotus, how Cyrus got in to the city, because a siege from outside the city is going to be darn near impossible with how big those walls are around the city of Babylon. So it's believed that Cyrus blocked the aqueduct. So he broke the dam, blocked the aqueduct to send the river on its normal course, basically downstream, and that would dry up all the water going into the city. And then he followed he followed their river to the city wall, and then got his guys to crawl through that underground tunnel into the city. And they would come up through the springs and wells and things like that that were in the city. His army would then come up out of those water areas. As the water dried up and left, they'd come up and they'd be right in the middle of the city, basically. I like that story. I hope that's a true story, because I think it's a really cool story to tell about the destruction of Babylon. It's an awesome metaphor for us in our day and age too, to think about. Babylon put up these huge defenses around itself, but yet it was this coming in under the wall that got them, basically. We could look at this as like a metaphor for how do we deal with outside influences inside our home. If we think of our home as a place of safety, a place where our children can have safety and some peace and happiness, if we think only in the sense of what we can see, like we lock up our house, we keep it safe so we don't have wild animals in our house or robbers and thieves coming into our home. We lock our doors, lock our windows, protect our home. But do we think of the invisible ways things can get into our home? You see, today we call that Wi-Fi or cellular. So data streams can get in to our home and to our children's mobile devices. Are we protecting them from this invisible enemy that's getting into our home? Bullying used to be something that happened at school or on your way to school or on your way home from school. It's all those places outside of your home is where bullying happened. If you went home, you didn't get bullied because you were home. But these days, bullies can come in through the Wi-Fi and still bully children through social media sites, through videos or other things like that. So when we think of the idea of the internet as another way that people can gain access to inside our home and to our family, are we making sure that there's not evil coming in through those ways? If we're not allowing our kids to see things they shouldn't see or deal with things they shouldn't deal with, just because it's not a physical threat doesn't mean it can't be a threat and it cause problems for our family inside the home. So kind of a fun metaphor that you get with this idea of Babylon and the army sneaking up underneath, as well as thinking about what are the other ways that people could get into your home that are subtle, that you wouldn't maybe be obvious or think about. That's kind of what, if you look at the whole idea of with Lord of the Rings, the Battle of Helm's Deep, they blew the aqueduct up so they could get in because that was its weak point. The walls were pretty formidable, except for that spot. So what is the weak point in your home defense? Kind of an idea. Now there's a couple other ways, or traditions I should say, about the fall of Babylon. Most popularly, we learn about this a lot in the book of Daniel, and we'll go into more about that in the book of Daniel that's coming up soon. There's another story that, and there's two possibilities with this. One is that there was a Persian person who underwent a little plastic surgery. He changed some of his physical features of his face, so he looked less Persian and looked more Babylonian, whatever that means. I'm not 100% sure. But he changed his face, and then he went and lived in Babylon. He was the plant. So he went in, he developed a routine, he got a job, he did things in Babylon, just mingled with the average people. And then when it came time to open the doors, when the Persian army was there, he just went out and opened up the back door and let the Persian army in, basically. So you can think of him as like a sleeper cell inside Babylon, waiting for the right moment, and then he attacked, basically, and let them in through the back door. A lot of metaphors around technology and internet and hacking stuff that goes along with that one too. The other story is there was a lesser king, a governor, if you will, because Babylon covered a lot of area, that he lived in Babylon or was staying there and was really disgruntled with the king of Babylon and how things were going. And he sided with Persia. And so he was already in Babylon, but he preferred Persia. And so he defected in a way and let Babylon's doors open and let the Persian army in to take over, basically. So there's three stories that talk about the destruction of Babylon. And I don't think scholars fully know 100% which one it is. More likely, I think it's not Herodotus's story, although his is a good one of going underneath the wall through the aqueducts. It's more likely somebody from the inside opened the gates let the army in, basically, at least from what we've seen in the historical records. But we don't know for sure. We don't have like a definitive, yes, this happened. No, the rest are all legends, but are false. But we think those are some of the possibilities of what could have happened, basically, to Babylon. It had to be somebody sneaking in or some way of getting in where you could bypass the wall and get in through a back door or through an aqueduct or something to get in, because those walls were formidable. It's a heck of a fortress of a city. Okay, well, let's talk about this more. Verse 13, O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, thine end is come, and the measure of thy covetousness. So when we think about this, it's interesting how dwellest upon many waters. This is the land. Babylon controlled a whole lot of area, basically, as well as sat on, they diverted a river through Babylon to have the water there for inside the city. This is interesting, the idea of, and the measure of thy covetousness. So this is to bring to mind like a piece of cloth with a string. Thine end is come, the piece of cloth with a little string coming off of it. Just like a string is cut, so will Babylon's attitude of success be cut. So you got that string pulling off, and so you snip it, pull that piece of string off your fabrics, your clothing and things. That's kind of the idea of measure of thy covetousness. We're going to cut you off. Basically, you're not going to like this. Verse 14, the Lord of hosts hath sworn by himself, saying, surely I will fill thee with men as with caterpillars, and they shall lift up a shout against thee. Now, when you think of caterpillars, this might be like, fill you up like caterpillars. I think in our minds we think of like lots of caterpillars all over the place. How does that deal with things? But what we might want to think of is, instead of using the word caterpillars, think of locust. So this was like a plague of locusts on the city. Think of even Egypt had one of those plagues with Moses. So the city will fill up with the enemy's army. And it'll be like a plague of locusts in the city. So Babylon's going to wake up the next morning and find that they've basically lost. They didn't have to put up a fight. The army marched in when they weren't looking and took over everything. And so by the time it gets daytime and everybody wakes up, they're now under Persian control. It's just, it all happened overnight and real quick. Nothing Babylon could do about it. Verse 15, he hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and hath stretched out the heaven by his understanding. So this is again God stating he is the creator. He is the God of everything, not just a God of a small section of things, the God of everything, which is in contradiction to Marduk, who's the Babylonian god, who is more of a storm deity, weather type god, rather than a god for everything. And of course, Marduk is fake. God is real. So continuing on with verse 16, when he uttered his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he caused the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings with rain, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. Now, that last line is really good to talk about. I'm talking about that for just a second here. Before that, though, verse 16 is talking about storms, which is, again, in contrast with Marduk. So God is contrasting himself with the God of Babylon, saying, I am the real God. Their God's the fake God, basically. Now, at the end of verse 16, this idea of, and bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. So in sometimes I think in your mind, you might think of like a treasure chest. You open it up and the wind comes out of it. Kind of an idea. But I think more appropriately is think of a room, like a stable room. Okay, like when you have stables where you keep horses and things, have like a room that when you open it up, that's where the wind is stored and it comes out from there from heaven into our world. In a lot of the apocryphal writings, the scriptures that didn't get added to the Bible, basically, they sometimes talk about this idea of treasuries in heaven. That God has these treasuries, God has these like sheds, if you will, that each shed contains an element, a law of nature, and that's where he controls them. Is he controls the laws of nature from these sheds, and then these sheds, when he opens them up and uses them, they emanate their effect into our world. So going from heaven, the dimension of heaven, to the dimension of our world to impact us and work with us. So it's a really fascinating concept. And if you ever get into quantum mechanics and string theory ideas, there is this idea that the universe is multidimensional, and it is possible that some of the things that govern our laws of physics come from another dimension that influence the elements in our world that cause the effect of the laws of physics we have today. That matches up pretty good with this concept of treasuries in heaven where the wind is stored. So when God needs a wind, he opens that doors up and he lets the wind out, and the wind goes from heaven into earth and causes wind down here. We can see, again, this idea from a laws of physics standpoint of the things that cause the wind to move. Maybe there's a law of physics that is governed by something in another dimension that affects us. Sometimes they think like the graviton, the force-carrying particle of gravity, is something that emanates from another dimension and that comes into our dimension and affects gravity, how we feel the motion of planets and the movement of time, basically. So kind of a cool little tidbit that we get there in verse 16 about he bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. This idea of treasuries, that the forces that govern the natural elements in our world are kept in the dimension of heaven. And that's where, so our whole dimension of space and time is controlled by a higher dimension of heaven. And so they come out of there and come down into our dimension to influence us. So kind of cool. Sorry if you're not sciencey. Sorry, that was a little bit of a geek rant right there, but kind of fun to look at. Verse 17, every man is brutish by his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. For his molten image is falsehood, and there is no breadth in them. So if you think about this idea, this is saying basically man cannot compare with the wisdom of God. And since idols are man's creations, they are lesser than men. They're not, it's kind of fun to think of, oh, they try to make these idols as if they are gods and are greater than men, but men created the idol. So the creator worshiping his creation, thinking his creation is greater than him. It's kind of weird. And God's like, this is not right. I am here. You worship me. I am the God that has created everything, basically. You don't stand a chance against me. I've created you. Kind of an idea. You didn't create me. I created you. And now verse 18, they are vanity, the work of errors. In the time of the visitation, they shall perish. Talking about creating idols. 19, the portion of Jacob is not like them. I like that. The portion of Jacob is not like them. What is the reward of Jacob? What he has, the blessings he has, is different than the blessings of everybody else. For he is the former of all things, and Israel is the rod of his inheritance. The Lord of hosts is his name. So this is usually referencing land that is inherited from your father. So this is the land of Canaan that was given to Abraham as a promised land for his future generations. In this instance, though, this portion of Jacob it's God who they're inheriting, basically, because that's what we've been talking about these last few verses is God. God has compared himself to man, found himself superior, and then reminded us that idols were created by man, which is still inferior to God, so they're even more inferior than God, and that God, if Israel follows his commandments, they inherit a connection with God. That's the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, basically. If they keep their covenants like their fathers, they will have God on their side, the real God, not these fake idols. Verse 20, thou art my battle axe and weapons of war, for with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy the kingdoms. Now, so this is the beginning of a poem, kind of looking back. This is like God reminiscing about utilizing Babylon to change the other nations up. So in a way, God saw Babylon as his battle axe, his weapons of war, using war as a way to change the nations, to get different things to happen, to make the conditions better, to help his people come follow him. So verse 21, and with thee will I break in pieces the horse and his rider, and with thee will I break in pieces the chariot and his rider. With thee also will I break in pieces man and woman, and with thee will I break in pieces old and young, and with thee will I break in pieces the young man and the maid. I will also break in pieces with thee the shepherd and his flock, and with thee will I break in pieces the husbandman and his yoke of oxen, and with thee will I break in pieces captains and rulers. So this is God using Babylon to change governments, to do things. So sometimes God can use nations to disrupt other nations, to cause changes that influence people's ability and hopefully encourages them to seek the real God. Verse 24, and I will render unto Babylon and unto all the inhabitants of Chaldea all their evil that they have done in Zion in your sight, saith the Lord. So now we're getting into another poem. This is the next couple of verses. This is all about the destruction of Babylon. So this is, Babylon was used to destroy other nations for God's purposes, and now Babylon is going to be destroyed for God's purposes, basically. So going from being the hammer to being hammered from God. Verse 25, behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain. Now, Babylon is being equated to being a mountain, a big, formidable force. Babylon, the city, looks like a mountain because of those big, high walls around it, which is going to be interesting. So let's look at this verse more. Thus saith the Lord, which destroyeth all the earth, and I will stretch out mine hand upon thee, and roll thee down from the rocks, and will make thee a burnt mountain. So he's going to render them useless. The city will be utterly destroyed and crumbled. Verse 26, and they shall not take of thee a stone for a corner, nor a stone for foundations, but thou shalt be desolate forever, saith the Lord. So Babylon's not coming back. When they're destroyed, they are destroyed. They're not coming back. Verse 27, set ye up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations, prepare the nations against her, call together against her the kingdoms of Ararat, Mini, and Ashenaz. Appoint a captain against her, cause the horses to come up as the rough caterpillars. So now, at the time of Babylon's fall, these are the kingdoms that where the Medes have intermingled, and these are part of the Medes, basically, like we read in that discussion from Thompson earlier. So they're subject to the Medes. That's part of the Medes, and they're going to be this group of armies that are going to come against them. Now, a couple of things I found about these people here as well. The people of Urartu, or Ararat as it says here, Urartu is an ancient country of southwest Asia centered in the mountainous region southeast of the Black Sea and southwest of the Caspian Sea. Today, the region is divided among Armenia, eastern Turkey, and northwestern Iran. Mentioned in Assyrian sources from the early 13th century BCE, Urartu enjoyed considerable political power in the Middle East in the 9th and 8th centuries. The Urartians were succeeded in the area in the 6th century, so 500 BC, by the Armenians. Urartu is an Assyrian name. The Urartians themselves called their country Bianili, and their capital, located at modern Van, Tushpa, or Terushpa. Most remains of Urartian settlements are found between the four lakes, Kildir and Van in Turkey, Urmia in Iran, and Sevan in Armenia, with a sparser extension westward to the Euphrates River. So this is coming out of Encyclopedia Britannica about these people. The Urartu people lived in the region of Lake Van, were a continuing problem. Late in the 9th century, Shamshi-Adad had to withdraw from activities to the west to contain the Urartu people. It was continuing pressure from the Urartu that kept Assyria away from Aramean and Phoenician and Israelite areas early in the 8th century. So Urartu made it hard for Assyria to keep pushing further west because they were wreaking havoc on the east. So Assyria had to keep turning back to them, and probably had the same problem with Babylon as well. The Urartu were expanding to the east and to the west and trying to extend southward into northern Syria. It was Tiglath-Pileser who crushingly defeated the Urartian king Sardar II and besieged his capital. Urartu people ceased to be a rival to Assyria when Sargon II broke their power completely. In doing so, he removed a useful buffer between Assyria and the Indo-Aryan barbarians, the Cimmerians, with a C, who were moving down from the Caucasus. So they're coming down, basically. Now, the Ashkenaz were allies of the Mani, or Mini in here, they took the A out of that, in a revolt against the Assyrians in the 7th century. They were conquered by the Medes and later by the Persians and provided contingents of troops in the Persian army that took Babylon in 538 BC. The commander-in-chief was a high-ranking military officer appointed to lead these nations. The army so mustered was pictured as a vast one whose horses were like a plague of locusts. So this even goes along with this idea that Jeremiah is putting forward, that these people have huge armies. And while they're relatively small nations, they're going to come together and they're going to be conquered by the Medes and be a bigger group, and they're going to destroy Babylon, basically. So when we look at this idea, now this thought is referred to the late stage, when we think of this idea of rough caterpillars at the end of verse 27, we're thinking late stage cycle of locusts, okay? Their wings will end up getting covered with rough, horny casings. So the army will have some serious armor on as they come into battle. So now this language is interesting. This idea, this is language that was once used to talk about Babylon marching on other nations, and now it's talking about being used against Babylon, basically. So they're on the other side of the coin now. So these groups are going to come together as the Medes and come down and destroy Babylon. So verse 28, prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And the land shall tremble and sorrow, for every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. And again, this was talked about when Babylon marched against other people, but now the same language is being used against Babylon. Verse 30, the mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. They have remained in their holds. Their might hath failed. They become as women. They have burned her dwelling places. Her bars are broken. Now, admittedly, we could look at verse 30 and say, when he says they became as women, we could say this is a derogatory term, that the fighting men, the valiant men of Babylon, have turned into little girls. They're panicking and crying and freaking out and just don't know what to do against this formidable army. Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made that kind of sounds derogatory to women in using that term. But that's the description. That's the idea they wanted to get across, is Babylon's army, which was known to be formidable, known to be a heck of an army, now doesn't stand a chance. It's a weak army. So verse 31, one post shall run to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to show the king of Babylon that his city is taken at one end. So these are the runners, these are the people that are going to be coming at the same time to the king, going, we've lost this part's fallen, we've got this part gone. So he's going to get all the news kind of at once, that the city is, all the parts of the city are gone, basically. It's going to be fighting all over the place, all these things happening, and it's going to be chaos, and Babylon's going to lose. Now, in addition to the two massive walls surrounding the heart of Babylon, an inner one, some 21 feet thick, and an outer one of over 12 feet thick, there were great walls thrown up at intervals beyond the city, together with a chain of fortresses north and south of the city. The Euphrates River gave protection, and a variety of waterways and large depressions flooded with water all combined to create the impression of an impregnable city. But the fords across the rivers and waterways were seized, and the reedy swamps were set on fire. The burning of the swamp reeds would deprive refugees of a place to hide, and would flush out any who might have escaped there already. Such news threw the warriors into a panic. So that was Thompson from his book of Jeremiah. So, there's armies all around. They've burned the swamps. You can't go hide out in the reeds. They're taking over these smaller areas. They're occupying the places. It's a hard battle to fight. You got multiple fronts, multiple things going on, and a much more formidable army than what you used to be. Basically, it's coming up against you. So verse 32, and that the passages are stopped, and the reeds they have burned with fire. Just talking about that, and the men of war are affrighted. So the ways to escape are cut off. The army has been able to infiltrate through all of these defenses to get to the main Babylonian city walls, and there they will find a way in without having to go through the walls. Verse 33, for thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor. It is time to thresh her. Yet a little while, and the time of her harvest shall come. Now, a threshing floor is something that's important to look at, so I want to read a little bit more about this. When villagers prepared for harvest, they pounded down and leveled the flat area or threshing floor, where the threshing and winnowing were carried out. The farmers would tramp their beasts around and around on the stalks of grain while they sat on the small threshing sledge beneath which were sharp blades or stones to cut up the stalks. That completed, they threw up the material with the broad winnowing forks on a windy day. The grain dropped and the chaff was blown aside. At harvest time, the dross was removed and the solid grain preserved. Babylon was a threshing floor to be leveled to the ground. It would be trodden down in preparation for the harvest, which was to come. Although the overthrow of Babylon may have lain several decades in the future, the whole scene is depicted as though it were taking place at the time of the prophecy. So Jeremiah is talking from a more first-person perspective, like as if it's happening now, even though it's not going to happen for a long time in the future. So that came out of Thompson's book, the book of Jeremiah, sorry. Verse 34, Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He has swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out. So this is an interesting kind of poetic metaphor here of Nebuchadnezzar eating another person. The person who's telling us this is the person getting eaten. So if we think of this, think of like the image of a gluttonous man who is overeaten. This is like talking about like taking, so he hath devoured me, hath crushed me, it's made me an empty vessel. So this is like taking all the valuable stuff out of a container, basically, and leaving it empty. So the container is basically worthless. The idea here of now dragons, that's more like jackals and things like that. He hath filled his belly with my delicates, he hath cast me out. So this would be like an image of an animal eating too much, and then now he's devoured me. He's taken all my value from me, and now he's throwing up. He ate too much. He consumed too much, and that's that casting me out. So they've just wasted all that life. They killed somebody, they ate him, and then they threw him up because he ate too much. It's just wasting, totally wasting everything, basically. So the gluttonous waste of Babylon, as he's destroyed Judah and other places. Now, verse 35, he says, the violence done to me and to my flesh be upon Babylon. Shall the inhabitant of Zion say, and my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea shall Jerusalem say. So this is Judah wanting vengeance on being eaten and consumed and spit out by Babylon, basically. So this is, Babylon's been bad. It's destroyed us. We want vengeance on them, basically. Verse 36, therefore, so because of what we've just read, thus saith the Lord, behold, I will plead thy cause. I will take vengeance for thee, and I will dry up her sea and make her springs dry. Now, verse 36 has a lot of legal terms in it. So this is God saying, I will plead thy cause. So that is the defense attorney, or actually more of a prosecuting attorney. I will plead your cause. They have harmed you. I will bring your case to the judge and plead it. And then I will take vengeance for thee as well. So God is going to be our attorney. If you think of a courtroom, God is being our attorney, pleading our case before the judge. But now, because he will seek vengeance also, he will be the judge at the same time and execute justice against Babylon because of what Babylon has done to Judah, basically. Now, verse 37, he goes on to say, and Babylon shall become heaps, a dwelling place for dragons, an astonishment, and an hissing without an inhabitant. So again, dragons are jackals, not what we think of dragons. So this is an hissing and without an inhabitant. This is the same fate that Jerusalem got in 587. So again, what Jerusalem, this is, the epitome of karma here. What Babylon did to everybody else is going to happen to Babylon, basically. It's what it comes down to. So verse 38, they shall roar together like lions. They shall yell as lions' whelps. In their heat I will make their feasts, and I will make them drunken, that they may rejoice and sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake, saith the Lord. So again, they're drunken. This is the cup of the wrath of God again, that metaphor that we saw earlier in the beginning of the chapter. So another idea that Babylon is going to be destroyed and gone and not stand much of a chance. Verse 40, verse 40, that's right. I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams with he-goats. They're going to follow them down, not even know what's going on till it's too late. Verse 41, how is Sheshach taken? How is the praise of the whole earth surprised? How has Babylon become an astonishment among the nations? This is this idea of like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. How did the great Babylon fall and have happen? So this is, verse 41 is kind of what is a poetic type called an atbash. An atbash is a device in which the letters of a name counted from the beginning of the alphabet are exchanged for letters counted from the end of the alphabet. Zimki would be Elam in the Hebrew alphabet, and Babel should be Sheshach. So kind of switching things around, kind of like a cipher, basically. So Aleph is replaced with Ta. Beth by Shin, basically. So you take the beginning of the alphabet, A, and the end of the alphabet, Z, and you switch them, basically. So that's where they get the name Sheshach from, is it's this switching, this atbash of Babel. or Babylon, basically. Babylon is taken. They've surprised, and everybody's astonished at how fast it happened. Now, verse 42, the sea is come up upon Babylon. She is covered with the multitude of the waves thereof. This verse causes a little bit of a problem for people. Okay. So this is talking about like an ocean upheaval coming, like a tsunami coming into Babylon. Where Babylon sits is nowhere near an ocean, like a large body of water. So the Euphrates River, I said Tigris earlier, it was Euphrates. The Euphrates River is the one that comes down by Babylon. And so they've diverted some of it into Babylon to use for their utilities. So the reference is hardly to Euphrates or any literal sea, basically. Thompson was commenting on this. The Persian Gulf is a long way from Babylon. There's probably an allusion here to the mythological chaotic waters of the primeval ocean, or Tiamat in Babylonian philosophy, which, according to the Babylonian myth of creation, were overthrown by the god Marduk when he fought against Tiamat and destroyed her. The fall of Babylon would be of such gigantic proportions that it would appear as nothing less than a reversal of that primeval victory. Babylonians' foes would surge over her like the chaotic waters of the primeval ocean, with their roaring waves and vivid symbol indeed. Now, once again, we're seeing this metaphor of the enemy is being seen like a sea as their troops come over the hills and come in like a flood. Babylon was seen this way as well. Earlier in Jeremiah, it's going to be a flood. Assyria was used as this idea as a flood. So now this is the flood coming in on Babylon, an army marching in on them as well. So they are going to have problems. It's just a formidable armies coming in on them, basically. Now, so verse 43, her cities are a desolation, a dry land, and a wilderness, and a land wherein no man dwelleth, neither doth any son of man pass thereby. So a lot of destruction, and nobody wants to go back to this place, basically. Now, verse 44, and I will punish Bel in Babylon. This means, Bel means Lord. So he's not saying I will punish Lord in Babylon, but the Lord of Babylon, which is Marduk. He is the god of Babylon, the idol that they worship. And so continuing on, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he hath swallowed. So who has he swallowed? If you think of earlier, this is probably referring to the idea that Babylon swallowed up Jerusalem. Basically took all of Jerusalem's value and people away from God, and now that he's going to spit it back up, God's going to reclaim it and bring it back. And the nation shall not flow together any more unto him, yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. Now the collapse, Thompson made a comment here. He says, the collapse of Babylon's walls in itself would be a startling phenomenon. The city wall proper was of double construction. The outer component was 12 feet thick and lay 20 feet from the inner wall, which was 21 feet thick. So the wall was wide enough to allow several chariots to drive abreast along the walls. So these walls are thick. You could run chariots along the top of them. There's these big, formidable walls. There was actually two walls technically together, not one giant wall, but two walls that were big, massive walls, basically. He says here, let's see, towers were set into the walls at intervals of about 60 feet. Outside the walls lay a ditch lined with bricks and bitumen and kept filled with water from the Euphrates. So they had a moat around them. They had these big formidable walls, double walls. So if you got through one wall, you still had a second wall to go through. Lots of defenses that they've built up that are going to be destroyed. Now, verse 45, my people, go ye out of the midst of her, and deliver ye every man his soul from the fierce anger of the Lord. So again, get out of Babylon. When you can leave, get out. Now, I think this is literal, like get the Jews out from the exile, go back to Jerusalem, but metaphorical as well as leave the world. God's people leave the world and are different and separate from the rest of the world. That's the people of Zion. So leave the world in every sense, basically. Verse 46, and lest your heart faint, and ye fear for the Lord, fear for the rumor that shall be heard in the land. A rumor shall both come 1 year, and after that in another year shall come a rumor. and violence in the land, ruler against ruler. So this is kind of an interesting thought to think about, okay? There's a couple things here. Lest your heart faint and ye fear for the rumor that you shall be heard in the land. So there would be a lot of smaller rebellions, is what we're talking about here in verse 46. They're going to happen over the years. So here's what's interesting. So the Jews are in Babylon. They're going to hear of these revolts against Babylon, and they're going to be, yay, yay, oh, it didn't work. Oh, there's another revolt, yay, oh, it didn't work. Oh, there's another revolt, yay, oh, it didn't work. So he's saying, don't be discouraged. Eventually it will work out. The one that God put in place is going to work better than all the other ones where men tried to do it themselves, basically. Eventually Babylon will fall. Now, the Babylonian Empire, this is kind of an interesting little history on the Babylonian Empire. Babylonian Empire was never so stable that it was free at any time of some local disturbances. There's always turmoil, revolts, things happening, and trying to keep the Babylonian Empire together. That's what they took advantage when the Assyrian Empire was big, to take them over. Now, the book of Jeremiah witnesses to several plots among subject peoples hoping to break free from Babylon's power. Both of the attacks on Jerusalem were in response to a local rebellion. Then there were the exploratory probes of the Elamites, the Medes, the Egyptians, and others into the confines of the Babylonian Empire. So we read about some of those prophecies of Babylon marching into them too in these previous chapters of Jeremiah. So even like he's talking about, what Thompson's talking about here is even Babylon coming into Jerusalem, destroying it, was a response to Jerusalem's revolt against Babylon. So there's all these little revolts and things that happen, and Babylon has to keep going out and dealing with these revolts against themselves. Let's see. In court circles, there were feuds and revolts. Nebuchadnezzar's son, Amel Marduk, or Evil Merodach, was assassinated in 560 BC by his brother-in-law, Nerglisser. Nerglisser's heir, Labashi Marduk, reigned only a few months and was supplanted by Nabonidus. It is not possible to link in verse 46 with any particular set of events, but the continuing instability of the empire must have given rise to many rumors. So that's what Thompson is looking at when he sees this verse 46, about all these rumors going on, and God telling the people, do not lose hope in your return, in your escape from Babylon, just because a lot of these things never work out. There's going to be a lot of little things happening. Most of them aren't going to work out, but then when God gets involved, it's going to work, basically. So verse 47, therefore, behold, the days come, that I will do judgment upon the graven images of Babylon, and her whole land shall be confounded, and all her slain shall fall in the midst of her. So again, when God decides it's time for him to be involved, he's going to make it successful. Verse 48, then the heaven and the earth and all that is therein shall sing for Babylon. For the spoiler shall come unto her from the north, saith the Lord. As Babylon hath caused the slain of Israel to fall, so at Babylon shall fall the slain of all the earth. Ye that have escaped the sword, go away, stand not still. Remember the Lord afar off, and let Jerusalem come into your mind. Now this is good advice that God is giving to the people. So when Babylon falls, remember your past in Jerusalem. Remember where you came from. And doing what God asked. Repent, come back to God. So come home. Come to your place in Jerusalem. Come back to where God is. That's where the temple is. We need to flee Babylon. This is a great, like we talked about, these people back then are literally fleeing Babylon at this time. But even metaphorically, for our day and age too, flee Babylon. Change the priorities in your life so that God is a higher priority. Shift what you're doing so that you're doing less worldly things and more spiritual things. You're following God more, making him a bigger priority. So this is a good metaphor for us, okay? We need to flee Babylon before Babylon is destroyed. It can't flee itself. It's going to be destroyed in the last days anyway. So if we leave the world, even not so much literally, but metaphorically, we spiritually leave the world. We don't believe the same things everybody else believes. We leave the way the world believes and believe more of what God wants us to believe. That will protect us and help us through these hard times ahead. Take time to remember what God has done for us. He's established a church. He's given us scriptures. There's prophecies and revelations and guidance to help us in following Him, basically. And this is, if you think about it, this is really the prodigal son story. Prodigal son is gone. Now it's time to come home. That's what the Lord's telling these people, literally and metaphorically. So verse 51, we are confounded because we have heard reproach. Shame hath covered our faces, for strangers are come into the sanctuaries of the Lord's house. So this is the Jews. Think about this as the Jews coming home. They come back to Jerusalem. They find people, some of the Jews that were left over, some of the interracial groups like the Samaritans and things. Other groups have come in. They're using the temple grounds, but they're not using it for what it was intended for. So these are like the Jews in exile thinking, I am thinking of the shame they've experienced. They got kicked out of Jerusalem. They were taken to exile. And then how bad the temple's been desecrated. And so they're coming back to this going, wow, things have changed. We need to get back to the true worship again. Verse 52, in fact, wherefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will do judgment upon her graven images, and through all her land the wounded shall groan. So Babylon's religion will be destroyed along with the nation. That's what verse 52 is really talking about. Verse 53, though Babylon should mount up to heaven, and though she should fortify the height of her strength, yet from me shall spoilers come unto her, saith the Lord. So even if Babylon had kept building itself up, making Babylon bigger, more mightier, it didn't matter. It was going to fall because God decreed it on them, basically. Verse 54, a sound of cry cometh from Babylon, and great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans. Because the Lord hath spoiled Babylon, and destroyed out of her the great voice. When her waves do roar like great waters, a noise of their voice is uttered. So lots of commotion and sound. Because the spoiler is come upon her, even upon Babylon, and her mighty men are taken. Every one of their bows is broken. For the Lord God of recompenses shall surely requite. So when we look at this, God is going to see that justice is meted out, basically. He's going to, the God of recompense, God is going to put justice in place and make sure it gets done. So verse 57, and I will make drunk her princes and her wise men, her captains and her rulers, her mighty men. They're the drunk of the dregs of the wrath of God. But literally, in a way, they were drunk. If you remember, when we get into the story of Daniel, we'll see that. They were partying the night that Persia took over Babylon, basically. So continue on here, and they shall sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake, saith the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire, and the people shall labor in vain, and the folk in the fire, and they shall be weary. So all the work to build this nearly impenetrable fortress, useless. It's going to fall and be completely destroyed, basically. All that time, all that effort, all the work that went into building these defenses, none of it's going to help them. They're going to fall. Verse 59, the word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah, the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, when he went to Zedekiah, the king of Judah, into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign. And this Seraiah was a quiet prince. So this is giving the word, Jeremiah is giving this word to Seraiah to take into Babylon with him, basically. Now, while the earlier section of the chapter was probably written after so scholars would think that this is written after the fall of Jerusalem. This section is interesting here. If you notice on 59, there's that paragraph symbol. That usually means the beginning of one line, and like in the ancient writings, the ancient scrolls, that would be the beginning of the next chapter. So 59 is kind of a change in thought from what we've had. So this is more of looking, going back, basically. This is probably written before the fall of Babylon, when Zedekiah was still the king in the 4th year of his reign, basically. Because Zedekiah was in the 11th year of his reign when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. But this is the 4th year of Zedekiah's reign. So the first part of 51, the prophecy of Babylon was probably written after the destruction of Jerusalem. But now from verse 59 on, we're going to get this another prophecy that got added to this that's from before Jerusalem's destroyed, basically. And a lot of scholars think the scribes who compiled the book of Jeremiah put it here because it fits with this narrative of the destruction of Babylon, basically. Now, so the fourth year of Zedekiah's reign, this is around 594 BC. This is the year Jerusalem's elite plotted to rebel against Babylon. Now, Zedekiah seems to have been implicated in the plot. Although the plot was abortive, Nebuchadnezzar's intelligence got wind of it, and some explanation was needed. It is altogether likely that Zedekiah was summoned in person to explain, although he may have gone on his own initiative to pledge his loyalty and to present his annual tribute. Jeremiah's letter, chapter 29, seems to have been sent earlier by different envoys. On that occasion also, Zedekiah may have sent a message to assure Nebuchadnezzar that the people of Judah were in no way implicated in the disturbances referred to in chapter 29. When Zedekiah went in person, Jeremiah seized the opportunity to entrust Seraiah, who was possibly the brother of Baruch, the written oracle referred in verse 60, and to ask him to carry out the symbolic act referred to in verses 61 to 64. We're going to read that in just a second. Seraiah was one of the officials in the caravan whose task was to secure suitable billets for overnight stops, or perhaps to supervise the tribute. So he's going along with this envoy. So there's this rumor. I think when I started talking about 59, I was thinking about the exiled people in Babylon. There is an exile that happened, but this is not the main exile. So this is before the main exile. Zedekiah has been summoned to go to Nebuchadnezzar's palace in Babylon to answer for the rumors that he and the elite are revolting against Babylon. And so that's Jeremiah sent this with one of the princes who were on that envoy to go to Babylon. So verse 60, so Jeremiah wrote in a book all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. So here's interesting. Verse 60 says that there's a possibility that maybe what we have read about the destruction of Babylon didn't happen after the destruction of Jerusalem, but happened before. And now Jeremiah has put it into a book, put it into one writing, and is sending it to send it to Babylon, basically. Verse 61, and Jeremiah said to Seraiah, when thou comest to Babylon, and shalt see, and shalt read all these words. So Jeremiah gives them his writings as they're being taken to Babylon so they can remember God and realize the promises of returning. Remember, the king before, Jehoiachin, who's before Zedekiah, is in Babylon as a prisoner. This is the 597, no, not 597, right around there, 597 BC conquest, when Babylon took Jehoiachin out, put Zedekiah in, and then took a bunch of royalty and experts of Babylon and took them, or of Jerusalem, moved them to Babylon. So now all the prophecies against Babylon are on a scroll, and they're on their way to Babylon to be read to the people. So verse 62, then shalt thou say, O Lord, thou hast spoken against this place, to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but it shall be desolate forever. So Seraiah is reading Jeremiah's prophecy to the exiles in Babylon, basically. Verse 63, and it shall be, when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it, and cast it into the midst of the Euphrates. And thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her. And they shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. So here's what's interesting. That's pretty crazy to think about. So this is kind of setting the stage for, hey guys, we know you're there. Babylon's a formidable force right now, but they will fall. God will bring you back from the exile. So here's the words of God to let you know about that. It's going to be a while, but it will eventually happen. So keep your hopes up, basically. And then in verse 64, we get this, thus far are the words of Jeremiah. Now we have one more chapter left in the book of Jeremiah. This is not the end. There's one more chapter. So this is kind of the effectual end of the book of Jeremiah. The next chapter is kind of a historical appendix that was added to the book of Jeremiah, basically. So we're going to get into that video next as we continue forward in understanding the book of Jeremiah.